I'm here to help you fall asleep tonight. Before we begin, like the video, subscribe, and tell me where are you watching from, and what time is it there. Now get comfortable, relax, and let the story carry you into the night. The Midnight Caller. The city never truly sleeps. Even at midnight, its streets hum with a restless energy. Distant sirens wail, tires hiss on wet asphalt, and somewhere, a lone figure moves through shadowed alleys. Detective Marcus Hale stood beneath the flickering street lamp, the cold drizzle settling into the creases of his worn coat. Tonight, the rain felt heavier somehow, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Earlier that evening, the first call came in. A voice on the other end. Low, deliberate, chilling. No name, no plea. Just a whisper. "Are you listening?" Marcus listened, gripping the receiver tight. Then, silence. And after the silence, a scream. The victim, a young woman named Emily Dawson, was found hours later in her small apartment, the room drenched in shadows and secrets. No signs of forced entry, no apparent struggle. But on her answering machine, a message. The same voice, the same haunting whisper. "Are you listening?" Marcus felt the weight of those words settle deep in his bones. This was no ordinary crime. It was a message, a challenge. The first whisper in a dark symphony that was only just beginning. As Marcus walked through the crime scene, every detail screamed for attention. The scattered photographs, the flickering television screen, the faint scent of perfume lingering in the air. It was as if the killer had left a mark, a signature, and somewhere beyond these walls, the Midnight Caller waited, waiting to speak again. The city's undercurrent of unease grew stronger as dawn approached. Detective Marcus Hale sat at his cluttered desk, the dim light of a desk lamp casting long shadows over stacks of case files. The Emily Dawson case was only the beginning. Within days, another call came, another whisper, another victim. The second woman, Lisa Carter, had received the same message on her phone. "Are you listening?" But this time Marcus was ready. Lisa's apartment was just blocks from Emily's. The similarities were impossible to ignore. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, and once again the same chilling message left on the answering machine. The pattern was clear. The Midnight Caller was not random. He was deliberate, methodical. Marcus studied the two crime scenes side by side. Every detail, the positioning of the victims, the faint scent of jasmine lingering in the air, the way the phones had been left off the hook. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was no ordinary serial killer. This was someone who wanted to be heard, to be feared. Pressure mounted on the police force. The media latched onto the story, dubbing the killer the Midnight Caller. A public fear spread like wildfire, and Marcus found himself haunted by the voice on those calls, whispering in his mind. "Are you listening?" Detective Marcus Hale carried more than the weight of this case. He carried the shadows of his own past. Years ago, another killer had slipped through his grasp. A case that haunted every sleepless night, a failure etched deep in his memory. The city had whispered about that case too, another series of murders that had left families shattered. Marcus had been younger then, less sure, but no less determined now. The Midnight Caller seemed to be toying with him, with every phone call, every whispered phrase. "Are you listening?" It was as if the killer knew Marcus's fears. His desk was cluttered with old case files, yellowed with age, photos of victims, police reports, scribbled notes. Each page a reminder of a promise Marcus had made, to never let another killer slip away. Tonight, as rain tapped against the window pane, Marcus stared at the photos. He wondered if this new killer was connected to the past, if history was about to repeat itself. And somewhere in the darkness, the Midnight Caller watched and waited, ready to strike again. It was late, well past midnight, when the phone rang again. Detective Marcus Hale's office was nearly empty, the hum of the city a distant echo through the glass windows. Lisa Carter's name appeared on the call log, the same name that had haunted Marcus for days. He answered, but the line was silent. Only a faint, breathy whisper followed. "Are you listening?" A chill ran down Marcus's spine. He knew the message all too well. This was the killer's voice. Marcus and his team rushed to Lisa's apartment, but time was not on their side. They found her barely conscious, an attempt on her life, cold and calculated. Lisa survived, but the message was clear. The midnight caller was escalating, and Marcus realized this nightmare was far from over. The city never felt darker than it did now. A creeping shadow stretched across every street, every alley, every quiet corner. Detective Marcus Hale sat in the dim light of the precinct's evidence room, surrounded by a sea of photographs, notes, and ringing phones. The case was consuming him. The midnight caller was no longer just a voice on the line. He was a ghost slipping through the cracks. The team combed through every detail from the first two attacks, the victims' routines, the routes they traveled, the places they'd been. They studied phone records, call logs, the tiniest fingerprints left behind. One thing was clear: the killer was meticulous. He planned every step with precision, leaving behind a trail that was almost impossible to follow. Marcus worked closely with a young analyst, Elise Moreno. Elise was sharp, tech-savvy, and relentless. Together, they began to unravel patterns in the chaos. Elise pointed out an unusual detail. Every call had been made from public payphones, locations scattered across the city. Why payphones? Marcus wondered. Why not call from a phone that couldn't be traced? They traced the payphones, one near an abandoned train station, another by a rundown warehouse. Each place dark, isolated, perfect for someone who wanted to stay invisible. Hours blurred into nights as the investigation pressed on. Maps were pinned with colored markers, whiteboards filled with scribbles and connections. But the killer was always one step ahead. Every new lead seemed to twist and turn into a dead end. Meanwhile, the families of the victims waited in agony. Grief and fear wrapped around the city like a cold fog. Marcus felt their pain deep in his chest. Each file on his desk was more than paper. It was a life. And then, late one night, a breakthrough. Elise discovered a pattern hidden within the calls. A faint, repeated series of tones embedded beneath the killer's whispered message. It was a code, a message. Marcus leaned in, heart pounding. Was this the midnight caller's real signature? Or a trap meant to lure them deeper into the dark? The city held its breath once more. The chase was far from over. The city moved on, as cities do. But for the families of Emily Dawson and Lisa Carter, time seemed to stop. Behind drawn curtains and locked doors, grief hung thick in the air. Photographs on mantels, empty chairs at dinner tables, rooms that felt too quiet. Marcus knew this kind of sorrow too well. He saw it in their eyes. The endless questions, the unspoken fears, the weight of what had been taken. Emily's parents, once vibrant and warm, now sat silently in their small living room. Her mother clutched a worn locket, fingers tracing its edges over and over again. Her father stared out the window, watching the rain slide down the glass like tears. Neither spoke much anymore. Lisa's sister met Marcus at the station. She was angry, desperate. Her voice trembled as she asked what they were doing to stop this from happening again. Marcus had no easy answers. He offered what little comfort he could. A promise. We're doing everything we can. We won't stop until we find him. But even as he said it, Marcus felt the hollow echo of those words. The midnight caller was always out of reach, and the families were left with empty rooms and sleepless nights. The media didn't help. Reporters crowded outside the victims' homes. Cameras flashed. Headlines screamed. Midnight caller strikes again. Who will be next? The city's fear grew, and so did the pressure on Marcus. In the quiet moments when the station grew still and the night pressed close, Marcus thought of his own losses. A brother taken too soon, a friend lost to violence. He knew this pain, and that made him more determined. The midnight caller had shattered lives, but Marcus would not let him do it again, not if he could help it. Somewhere in the city, hidden behind layers of darkness and disguise. The midnight caller watched. He listened to the hum of the streets below, the distant sirens, the low murmur of voices. The city felt alive beneath him, a thing to be toyed with. In his world, there were no faces, no names, only voices, only fear. He kept a notebook, its pages filled with scribbled numbers and notes, times, locations, names of phone booths, a map of shadows that only he understood. He chose his victims with care, always those who would answer, always those who would listen, because that's what he wanted most, for someone to listen. Each call was a ritual, the soft click of the receiver, the steady hum of the dial tone, the thrill as the line connected, and then the words, "Are you listening?" He imagined their faces on the other end, the confusion, the fear. He fed on it. The killer stayed in motion, never in one place too long. He drifted from apartment to apartment, sleeping in borrowed spaces. His world was made of shadows, and he liked it that way. But now, the game was changing. The detective was getting closer. He could feel it, and that excited him. The next move would need to be bolder, riskier. The next call would be the one that made them all listen. A single sentence that turned Marcus's blood cold. "It's someone you know." Marcus froze. The words echoed in his mind. Someone he knew, someone close. The midnight caller wasn't just hunting strangers anymore. Days turned into nights, nights into long, sleepless hours. And all the while, the city waited. Waited for another whisper, another call, another victim. Marcus Hale felt the weight of that waiting. Every lead that had gone cold, every promise he'd made to grieving families. But tonight, there was something different. Elise, the analyst, entered his office. Her eyes were sharp, focused, a glint of determination behind the fatigue. "We found something," she said. Her voice was quiet, but Marcus could hear the urgency beneath it. They had gone deeper into the data, deeper than before, tracing the payphone calls, analyzing times, locations, traffic patterns, and then the pattern emerged. The calls weren't random, the locations weren't random. They formed a path, a loop, a circle that always brought the killer back to the same place. An old, crumbling apartment block on the city's edge, abandoned, forgotten, but not empty. It was there, Marcus realized, that the midnight caller must be watching, waiting, planning his next move. Marcus and his team prepared quietly. No sirens, no flashing lights. They didn't want to spook him. They approached the building under cover of darkness. The air smelled of rain and rust. The windows were black holes in the crumbling facade. Inside, the building was silent. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like a gunshot. Marcus led the way up the stairs, each step a reminder of how close, how dangerously close, they were to the one they'd been chasing. On the top floor, they found the room. A single chair, a payphone receiver torn from a stolen phone rigged with wires, newspaper clippings of the murders pinned to the walls. But the midnight caller was gone. He had been here, watching, listening, and now he had vanished again. But for the first time, Marcus felt they were no longer blind. They had seen the killer's den. They had found his lair, and that meant the chase was entering its final, most dangerous stage. The city was restless that night, the kind of night when the air felt heavy, as if the streets themselves knew something was coming. Marcus Hale felt it too, a quiet warning in his bones. Back at his apartment, he tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept returning to that room, the killer's den, the clippings, the stolen phone parts, the empty chair, as if the midnight caller had been waiting for him all along. Then, the phone rang. Marcus stared at it for a long moment, the shrill sound cutting through the silence like a knife. Finally, he picked up. "Are you listening?" The voice was softer now, almost intimate. Marcus gripped the receiver, heart pounding. "I'm listening," he said, his voice steady, calm, but every nerve was on edge. The caller spoke again, a single sentence that turned Marcus's blood cold. "It's someone you know." Marcus froze. The words echoed in his mind. Someone he knew, someone close. The midnight caller wasn't just hunting strangers anymore. This time, it was personal. Marcus acted fast. He called his team. He called Elise, friends, family, everyone. But the killer had planned this well. A new victim had already been chosen, someone Marcus cared about, and the clock was ticking. Marcus traced the call's location in real time, a rooftop near the river. He raced through the city's empty streets, the night air cold against his face. Every second felt like a lifetime. When he arrived, the rooftop was deserted, but the phone was there, resting on the ledge. A single red light blinked on its base, a message. Marcus lifted the receiver. The voice spoke one final time. "Now you know what it feels like to listen." The line went dead, and the city fell silent once more. Marcus Hale didn't sleep that night. He stood on that empty rooftop, staring at the river below, listening to the city breathe. The midnight caller had vanished into the shadows again, but Marcus knew it was time to end this. Back at the station, dawn broke slowly. A pale gray light filtered through the blinds. Elise worked at her computer, eyes bloodshot, fingers moving over the keyboard with purpose. Together, they pieced it together, the final thread in the web. The killer had left a trace in his last call. A slip, an echo of a street name caught in the background, a siren that matched a call log at a specific intersection. They moved fast. No noise, no headlines. This wasn't for the cameras. This was for the victims. Marcus found him in a crumbling warehouse by the river's edge. The killer stood alone, the man who had haunted their nights and filled the city with fear. A man unremarkable in appearance, a face that could blend into any crowd. Marcus approached slowly, no weapon drawn, no words wasted. Just two men, one seeking justice, one seeking to be heard. The midnight caller spoke first. "I just wanted someone to listen." His voice was small now, broken. Marcus nodded, the weight of all the lives touched by this nightmare heavy on his heart. "I've been listening," he said, "and it ends here." There was no struggle. The killer surrendered, and as they led him away, the city seemed to exhale. Marcus stood by the river, watching the dawn break fully over the skyline. He thought of Emily, Lisa, the families who would never be whole again. And he thought of the silence that would finally return to the night. The midnight caller's voice would no longer haunt the phones. The city could begin to heal, and Marcus could finally rest. In the weeks that followed, the city began to heal. The headlines faded, the sirens grew fewer. The phones rang, but only with the ordinary calls of daily life. Detective Marcus Hale returned to his quiet routines. Coffee in the early dawn, walks along the river where the final chase had ended. The midnight caller's voice no longer echoed through the night. The city's fear was replaced by something gentler, something like hope. Marcus visited the families. He offered no grand speeches, only his presence, only his promise that their loved ones would not be forgotten. The case files were closed, but the memories remained, and in the soft hum of the city at rest, Marcus listened, not for danger, not for a killer's whisper, but for the ordinary sounds of a city that could finally sleep. End. Next story, Echoes in the Pines. The pines stretched for miles, tall, ancient, their needles whispering secrets with every cold breeze. At night, the forest came alive in strange ways. The creak of branches, the distant call of an owl, the wind weaving through the trees, like voices too faint to understand. It was here, on a narrow, overgrown trail known only to locals as Ridge Path, that the first hiker disappeared. His name was Daniel Lowe, 32 years old, an experienced backpacker, the kind of man who knew how to read the land, who carried a compass even in the age of GPS. Daniel left the small town of Briar's Hollow one cool autumn morning. Locals saw him at the diner, sipping coffee, boots dusty, a folded map on the table beside him. He smiled, tipped his hat, then walked out, heading toward the trailhead at the edge of town. He never came back. The search lasted for weeks. volunteers, dogs, drones. But Ridge Path swallowed him whole. No tent, no pack, no footprints. Nothing but the endless pines and their whispers. At first, people spoke of misstep, accident, or wild animals. But as the weeks passed, fear began to take root. Old stories surfaced. Stories of spirits in the woods, cursed ground, the pines that could lure a person in and never let them leave. Daniel Lowe became the first echo in the pines, but not the last. Months passed. The pines shed their needles in thick carpets of gold and brown. Winter crept down from the peaks, bringing icy winds that howled through the valleys. But Daniel Lowe was never found. The people of Briar's Hollow tried to move on. They spoke of Daniel less and less, but his name still echoed in the quiet moments. In the empty booth at the diner, in the glance toward the trailhead as the sun set. And then, it happened again. Late spring, another hiker, Maria Collins, 27, new to the area. A school teacher who loved nature, loved quiet, loved to walk the trails alone with only her thoughts and the rhythm of the forest. Maria parked at the same trailhead, Ridge Path, the same trail that had swallowed Daniel Lowe. She told her neighbors she'd be back by dark, that she just needed a few hours of peace. But darkness came, and Maria didn't. The search began again. Dogs picked up her scent at the trail's start. And then, nothing. No tracks, no sign of struggle, no discarded pack. It was as if the forest itself had closed over her. The town changed after Maria vanished. What was once unease became fear. Hikers stopped visiting. Stopped. Locals stopped speaking of the pines except in hushed tones. And at night, some swore they heard things. Voices on the wind. Echoes that didn't belong to the living. Two lost. Both on Ridge Path. The pattern was clear to those willing to see it, but the hardest truths are the ones we're slowest to face. The forest had always been a place of peace for Elena Reyes. As a child, she'd followed her grandfather along these same trails, learning to listen to the land, to read the wind, to respect the pines. Now, as the senior ranger assigned to Briar's Hollow, the forest was her responsibility, and the disappearances felt like a failure she couldn't outrun. Elena had led both searches. She knew the trails better than anyone, knew where water pooled after rain, where the rocks could give beneath your feet, where the deer carved narrow paths through the undergrowth. But nothing she knew had helped bring Daniel Lowe or Maria Collins home. The woods had given her no clues, just silence, and that silence haunted her. She walked Ridge Path every day now, not out of duty, out of need. The trail felt different, heavier, as if the pines were watching, as if they held their breath each time she passed. Elena spoke softly to herself as she walked, an old habit from years on the job. Reassurances no one could hear. It'll be okay. We'll find them. But the forest gave no answers, and at night, when the wind rose and the branches creaked and the coyotes called from the ridge, Elena lay awake and listened, wondering if somewhere, out in the dark, Daniel and Maria were still there. Somehow. Or if the forest had swallowed them whole. The weight of it grew heavier with each passing week, and though she tried to hide it, the townspeople could see it in her eyes. A weariness, a quiet desperation. Elena Reyes, the one who always knew the way, had no path forward. Not yet, but that would change soon, because the forest was not done, and neither was the one hiding within it. The morning fog hung low over Briar's Hollow as Nate Harper drove down the winding mountain road. He wasn't from here. A journalist chasing stories that others overlooked, truths hidden in quiet places. The pines outside his window stretched endlessly, dark and towering, like silent sentinels guarding their secrets. Nate had heard the rumors before arriving. Disappearances, whispered legends, a trail that claimed lives without leaving a trace. He wasn't sure what he believed, but he knew one thing. There was a story here. A story that needed telling. At the local diner, Nate watched the wary glances from behind coffee cups. He introduced himself, polite and patient, asking questions that were met with hesitation or silence. The people of Briar's Hollow were guarded, protective of their town's wounds. They didn't want outsiders stirring up the past. But Nate had a way with words. Slowly, stories began to surface. Fragments about Ridgepath, about Daniel Lowe and Maria Collins, about the forest that took more than it gave. That night, as rain began to fall softly against the diner's windows, Nate stood outside looking up at the dark silhouettes of the pines. He felt a chill that wasn't from the cold. The forest was watching. And Nate Harper had just stepped into its story. The next morning, Nate met Elena at the ranger station, a small wooden building nestled among towering firs. She was waiting, already dressed in worn boots and a weathered jacket, her eyes sharp but tired. They exchanged quiet greetings, both understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. Elena handed Nate a detailed map, its edges curled and stained from years of use. "This is Ridgepath," she said, her voice steady. "The trail where they disappeared." She pointed to a narrow line winding through the forest, crossing creeks and climbing rocky slopes. As they stepped onto the trail, the forest enveloped them. The canopy above filtered the sunlight into soft, green shadows. The air smelled of pine resin and damp earth. Birds called softly in the distance, but the usual sounds of the forest felt muted, like the woods were holding their breath. They walked slowly, their steps careful on the uneven ground. Elena shared what she knew, the searches, the evidence that had turned up, the strange things left behind. Nate listened, taking it all in. There was a story here, layered beneath the soil and tangled roots, something that had evaded capture for too long. At one point, Elena stopped beside a moss-covered rock. She knelt, brushing away the leaves to reveal faint carvings etched into the stone, lines and symbols that neither could decipher. "Whoever's been here," Elena murmured, "was leaving a message, or a warning." Nate snapped a photo, his curiosity deepening. They pressed on, each step leading them deeper into the heart of the mystery, and closer to the shadows that had claimed so many before. The next morning, Nate met Elena at the ranger station, a small wooden building nestled among towering firs. She was waiting, already dressed in worn boots and a weathered jacket, her eyes sharp but tired. They exchanged quiet greetings, both understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. Elena handed Nate a detailed map, its edges curled and stained from years of use. "This is Ridgepath," she said, her voice steady. "The trail where they disappeared." She pointed to a narrow line winding through the forest, crossing creeks and climbing rocky slopes. As they stepped onto the trail, the forest enveloped them. The canopy above filtered the sunlight into soft green shadows. The air smelled of pine resin and damp earth. Birds called softly in the distance, but the usual sounds of the forest felt muted, like the woods were holding their breath. They walked slowly, their steps careful on the uneven ground. Elena shared what she knew. The searches, the evidence that had turned up, the strange things left behind. Nate listened, taking it all in. There was a story here, layered beneath the soil and tangled roots, something that had evaded capture for too long. At one point, Elena stopped beside a moss-covered rock. She knelt, brushing away the leaves to reveal faint carvings etched into the stone, lines and symbols that neither could decipher. "Whoever's been here," Elena murmured, "was leaving a message, or a warning." Nate snapped a photo, his curiosity deepening. They pressed on, each step leading them deeper into the heart of the mystery, and closer to the shadows that had claimed so many before. The deeper they ventured into the forest, the heavier the air seemed to grow. Moss blanketed the ground and clung to tree trunks, softening the sounds of their footsteps. But amid the quiet beauty, subtle signs told a darker story. Discarded items appeared along the path. A torn backpack strap caught on a branch, a cracked water bottle half buried in the dirt. Each piece seemed insignificant alone, but together they whispered of hurried flight, or worse. Elena knelt beside a small clearing where the ground was disturbed. Earth turned up like claws had scratched beneath the surface. Nate shone his flashlight into the shadows, revealing faint footprints pressed into the soft soil. They were too large for any local animal. Nearby, a hastily abandoned campsite told a chilling tale. An empty tent frame, a cold campfire ring, and strange symbols drawn in charcoal on nearby rocks. Elena traced the shapes with her fingers, zigzags and spirals that made no immediate sense. "We're not dealing with accidents anymore," she said quietly. "This is intentional. Someone is leaving signs." Nate's mind raced. Who would want to trap hikers here? And what was the meaning behind these cryptic marks? As they packed up to leave the clearing, a sudden rustle in the underbrush froze them both. Their eyes scanned the shadows, but there was nothing, only the whisper of the pines and the cold weight of silence. The forest was watching, and it was waiting. The forest had shifted. What once felt like an ancient sanctuary now seemed like a labyrinth of eyes and whispers. Nate and Elena moved cautiously, each step weighed down by the knowledge that they were no longer alone. Signs became more frequent, broken branches at odd angles, footprints that vanished suddenly, and faint echoes that didn't belong to the wind. The feeling settled deep in their bones. Someone was watching, waiting. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Nate spotted a figure in the distance, just beyond the tree line. Too still to be an animal, too silent to be a stranger passing through. They followed, careful not to reveal themselves, but the figure disappeared into the shadows before they could close the distance. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "We're being hunted." The realization sharpened their focus. This wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a deadly game. Each trail they took seemed to loop back on itself, the forest twisting like a trap. Their radios crackled with static. Night fell heavy and dark. They found themselves cornered in a small clearing, surrounded by trees that seemed to lean in closer, suffocating. The hunter was near, and as the cold night air closed in, Nate and Elena understood. The forest wasn't just hiding secrets, it was hiding a predator. Darkness had settled fully over the forest, the canopy blotting out even the faintest moonlight. Nate and Elena moved silently, every sense alert to the faintest sound or movement. Their breaths came in shallow bursts, mingling with the cold night air. They knew the hunter was close. Too close. The trail led them deeper into the woods, where shadows twisted and the trees grew dense and tangled. Suddenly, a snapped twig echoed nearby. They froze. Nate's hand moved instinctively to the flashlight. Elena signaled him to wait. In the darkness, faint eyes glimmered. A figure darted between the trees, quick, elusive, always just out of reach. The chase had begun. They followed, hearts pounding, pushing through thorn and bramble. Branches scraped their faces, but they pressed on. The forest seemed alive. Every rustle, every crack, heightened their awareness, feeding their fear and determination. They caught glimpses of movement, heard soft whispers carried on the wind. At times it felt like the hunter was toying with them, leading them deeper into his domain, where escape grew harder. Suddenly, Elena stumbled, catching herself against a tree. The hunter was closing in. They reached a clearing bathed in faint moonlight, but it was a trap. Hidden snares lay tangled in the undergrowth, rigged to catch the unwary. Nate and Elena realized the hunter had prepared for this confrontation. Their survival depended not just on courage, but on outwitting a foe who knew these woods better than they ever could. The forest closed in around them like a living wall, the trees towering overhead casting long, dark shadows that seemed to move with a mind of their own. Nate and Elena stood frozen in the clearing, eyes scanning for any sign of their hunter. The snares had been baited perfectly, traps laid to catch anyone foolish enough to follow. A sudden snap of a twig behind them jolted their hearts into overdrive. They spun around just in time to see a figure vanish between the trees, swift, silent, and elusive. The weight of the wilderness pressed down on them, the silence punctuated only by their ragged breaths and the distant call of an owl. With no clear path forward and the hunter closing in, they realized escape wouldn't come easy. Every direction seemed like a dead end, every rustle a threat. They were caught, trapped in the heart of the forest, at the mercy of a predator who knew every inch of these woods. But surrender wasn't an option. They had come too far, lost too much. Nate's eyes met Elena's, a silent agreement passing between them. Together they would face the darkness, fight the shadows, and survive. The moon hung low, casting pale light through the skeletal branches. Nate and Elena moved cautiously, every sound amplified in the stillness of the night. Their breaths came steady but sharp, Muscles tense, senses razor-sharp. Ahead, a faint glow flickered. An old campfire pit still warm, the embers alive like silent witnesses. They knew the hunter was close. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. Soft, cold. "You shouldn't have come here." From the shadows, a figure emerged. Unshaven, gaunt, eyes hard and empty. The man who had haunted the forest and stolen its wanderers. Elena stepped forward, steady and unflinching. "This ends now." The hunter's gaze flickered. A flash of something beneath the menace. Regret, loneliness, a shattered past. He spoke of a life broken by loss, a twisted desire to control the forest that had taken everything from him. Nate raised his voice, firm and calm. "This forest belongs to everyone, and it will no longer be a place of fear." The confrontation was tense but brief. The hunter surrendered, his reign of terror ending in the very woods that had birthed it. As dawn crept over the mountain peaks, the forest seemed to breathe again. The pines whispered softly, no longer voices of dread, but of hope and healing. Nate and Elena stood together, watching the first light chase away the shadows. They knew the echoes of the past would linger, but so would the strength of those who refused to be silenced. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its quiet rhythm filling the empty corners of the radio studio. Jamie Cross sat behind the microphone, headphones resting lightly over her ears, eyes fixed on the glowing console in front of her. It was midnight, the hour when the city's noise softened and the night's secrets whispered through the airwaves. Her voice was calm, smooth, an anchor in the darkness as she greeted her listeners and welcomed them into the night. Soft music played behind her words, setting a mood both intimate and mysterious. Calls came in steadily, voices sharing stories, confessions, and midnight thoughts. Jamie listened carefully, offering empathy and understanding, weaving a quiet connection through the ether. Then, just before the hour, the line blinked. A call came through. Anonymous. The voice was distorted, low, and cold. "I'm coming for you, Jamie." Her breath caught. A chill slid down her spine, but on air her voice remained steady. "Who is this?" she asked softly, the tension barely perceptible. The line went dead. For a moment the silence was thick enough to hear. Then the music resumed. Jamie shook off the unease. Threatening calls were not unheard of in her line of work. She told herself it was a prank, a mistake. But somewhere deep inside, a seed of fear had taken root. And as the night stretched on, Jamie Cross was on air, alone. The night air hummed softly through the city's veins as Jamie continued her broadcast. Her voice was steady, masking the faint tremor beneath, the unease from the earlier call still lingering. Listeners sent messages of support, unaware of the shadow looming over the night. Then, without warning, the signal faltered. Static crackled through the speakers, drowning out the soft music and Jamie's words. The sound stretched on longer than it should have, an unbroken wave of silence. Behind the scenes, the station manager, Rachel Lee, watched the control panel with growing alarm. She called out into the studio, but there was no answer. The silence was absolute. Minutes ticked by. Listeners grew confused. Calls flooded in. Where was Jamie? Emergency protocols kicked in. Rachel contacted security. Technicians scrambled to restore the feed, but the broadcast remained dead air. Outside the studio, the city slept unaware, or perhaps waiting for answers that weren't coming. Back in the quiet control room, Rachel's hands trembled as she reached for the phone to call the police. The chilling truth settled in. Jamie Cross was gone. The morning light spilled weakly through the blinds of the police station. Detective Alex Monroe pored over footage, searching for any hint of Jamie's whereabouts. Rachel Lee sat beside him, her face pale but determined. Together they sifted through caller logs, messages, and security tapes. The threatening call was the first clue. A ghost in the static, untraceable. Questions hung heavy in the air. Who had wanted Jamie silenced? Why? As they delved deeper, shadows emerged from Jamie's past. Enemies masked as friends. Whispers of scandal and obsession. The city's glittering surface began to crack, revealing the darker stories beneath. Jamie Cross was more than a voice on the radio. She was a confidant, a midnight companion to thousands. But behind the scenes, her life was complicated. Alex and Rachel interviewed those closest to her, friends, family, co-workers. They painted a picture of a woman brave and kind, but also guarded. She had secrets, arguments over a past relationship, a stalker who had been reported but never caught, a quiet fear she never shared on air. Each interview added a piece to the puzzle, but also more questions. What had Jamie been hiding? And had it cost her everything? The city never truly rested. Its heartbeat pulsed beneath streets and skyscrapers, flowing through fiber optic veins and radio waves that wrapped the metropolis in an invisible web. Somewhere in that web, a shadow hid. A man whose voice had sent a threat that chilled the night and vanished with the static. Now, Alex Monroe and Rachel Lee were determined to find him. Inside the radio station's dimly lit tech room, monitors flickered with streams of data. Alex leaned close to the screen, his eyes scanning logs and digital footprints that traced the flow of the threatening call. It was no simple task. The voice had been masked by layers of encryption, routed through proxies designed to confuse and evade. It was like untangling a thread woven into a vast and shifting tapestry. Rachel stood beside him, tense but focused. "We have the call recording," she said. It says the voice was filtered through multiple servers, but they spotted a pattern, a faint ping from an apartment complex downtown. Alex nodded. "If we can track that ping, maybe we can find where it all started." And hours passed as they and the IT team pieced together the puzzle, following electronic breadcrumbs through a maze of firewalls and virtual hideouts. Every lead was a flicker of hope, but also a reminder of how carefully the caller covered his tracks. Finally, a breakthrough. An IP address tied to a drab residential building surfaced. A nondescript block nestled between a laundromat and a late-night diner. Surveillance teams set up discreet cameras, eyes trained on the windows that might hide the man responsible. Over the next days, patterns emerged. A solitary figure was often seen leaving the building at odd hours. He kept to himself, avoiding contact, his hood pulled low as if to shield him from the world. Occasionally, he glanced across the street, toward the radio station, his eyes cold and unblinking. His name was Michael Garrett, a man in his mid-30s with a history as tangled and dark as the city's alleys. Reports of mental health struggles, past episodes of erratic violence, and a trail of isolation. Social media revealed an obsession with Jamie Cross's show, where he left angry comments, conspiracy theories, and demands that spiraled into madness. Alex and Rachel realized this was no random stalker, but someone dangerously fixated, whose fractured mind had turned deadly. The discovery electrified the investigation, but it also deepened the mystery. Where was Jamie? How had he managed to make her disappear without leaving a trace? The city held its breath as the net tightened around Michael Garrett, but the shadows were thick, and time was slipping away. The city never truly reveals its secrets all at once. Like a radio dial, tuning in closer brings hidden signals into focus, fragments of truth buried beneath noise and distortion. Alex Monroe and Rachel Lee found themselves drawn deeper into the static, unraveling threads that led to places darker than either had imagined. Michael Garrett's apartment was a trove of disquieting evidence. When officers finally secured a search warrant, they discovered walls plastered with torn newspaper clippings, photographs of Jamie Cross, maps marked with routes to the radio station, and pages of rambling journals filled with fragmented thoughts. His obsession was no longer a whisper, it was a roar. Inside those pages, Alex and Rachel saw a man wrestling with his own demons. Abandoned as a child, isolated and misunderstood, Michael had built a fragile world where Jamie's voice was his only anchor. When she had ended a call segment he'd hijacked with frantic demands, his fixation turned toxic. The journals spoke of control, punishment, and silencing, words inked with desperation and rage. Neighbors spoke of strange sounds and erratic behavior, late-night pacing, windows left open regardless of the weather, and a haunting presence that unsettled the building. Yet no one had anticipated the depths of Michael's darkness or his plans. As Alex and Rachel pieced the puzzle together, a chilling realization took hold. Michael wasn't just obsessed, he was prepared. The disappearance of Jamie Cross was no accident. It was the execution of a calculated plan. For days, the city waited, the air thick with uncertainty. Jamie's absence rippled through her community of listeners, friends, and colleagues. The radio station doubled down on security, but hope flickered faintly, shadowed by fear. Rachel felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. She often found herself staring at Jamie's empty chair in the studio, wondering if somewhere in the city, Jamie was listening to the silence that had replaced her voice. Meanwhile, Alex reached out to experts, psychologists, tech specialists, former law enforcement, to understand the depths of Michael's mind and predict his next move. The darkness that enveloped the case was not just a criminal act, but a psychological battle. Every lead was followed, every possibility explored, but the forest of unknowns grew thicker. The hunt for Jamie became a race against not just a man, but the silence he had imposed. The city's nighttime airwaves, once alive with Jamie's comforting presence, now carried only echoes, static frequencies that whispered warnings to those who listened closely. The case was no different. As they sifted through Jamie's past, a new picture emerged, complex and fraught with hidden pain. Jamie was not just a voice on the radio. She was a woman with secrets, fears, and connections that cast long shadows. Old friends revealed a side of Jamie few knew, a quiet strength tempered by a history of trauma and loss. She had struggled with a secret relationship years before, involving someone powerful and dangerous, a link she had never revealed publicly. This secret, Alex realized, might have made her vulnerable. A warning she'd received, veiled and ignored, loomed in the background. The stalker might be more than a lone fanatic. He could be a pawn or a scapegoat in a larger, darker game. The deeper Alex and Rachel dug, the more tangled the web became. Financial records, phone logs, and anonymous tips hinted at threats from other sources. Shadowy figures who thrived in silence and manipulation. The case was no longer just about Jamie's disappearance, but about exposing a network of power and control that had remained hidden beneath the city's glittering surface. Alex felt the weight of the truth settling on him. To save Jamie and himself, they would have to confront not only a dangerous man, but a system built on lies and fear. With leads converging, Alex and Rachel prepared for a final move. It was time to set a trap. The station arranged a special broadcast, an announcement meant to lure Michael out of hiding. They fabricated a segment that would appear vulnerable, a direct message from Jamie, an irresistible beacon to a man desperate for control. Security tightened. The police prepared to move swiftly. The night of the broadcast was tense. Staff whispered, nerves taut as the city tuned in. As the fake segment aired, cameras caught Michael's reaction, a flicker of hope and rage that quickly turned to resolve. Officers tracked his movements as he approached the station's vicinity, unaware he was walking into a carefully laid snare. Suddenly, the trap sprung. Michael was confronted and arrested after a brief but intense struggle. His capture brought relief but also new questions. Where was Jamie? Weeks passed in a fragile calm. Then, a tip. A forgotten address on the edge of the city. A warehouse long abandoned. Alex and Rachel moved quickly, accompanied by police and search teams. Inside, in a small hidden room, they found Jamie, alive but weakened, her spirit battered by captivity. The reunion was quiet, heavy with emotion and unspoken pain. Jamie's rescue marked the end of one chapter but the beginning of healing. Michael faced justice, his reign of terror finally over. The city slowly healed, its night airwaves returning to life. Jamie's voice returned to the radio, softer but stronger, a beacon for those lost in darkness. And Alex and Rachel listened closely, not just to the static, but to the stories waiting to be told. The end. The cold case file sat on Sarah Blake's desk like a ghost from another lifetime. The yellowed edges of the paper, the faded photographs tucked inside, and the scribbled notes all whispered stories she had heard before. Stories of loss, silence, and time's unforgiving passage. Emily Saunders was just 22 when she vanished, a bright, promising young woman with a future full of possibilities. Her disappearance had shattered a community and left questions that no one dared to fully ask. 20 years had passed, but for some, the past never truly faded. Sarah, a journalist known for her relentless pursuit of truth, had followed many cold cases, but Emily's held a particular weight. Something about the case, the way it had slipped through cracks, the way the family's pain lingered in quiet desperation, called to her. It was more than a story. It was a mystery wrapped in silence. The town where Emily lived was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were hard to keep but easy to ignore. On the surface, it was peaceful. Quiet streets lined with maple trees, Sunday markets, and friendly neighbors. But beneath that calm lay undercurrents of tension, unspoken histories and fractures that ran deep. Sarah pulled open the drawer where she kept her notes. The files on Emily's disappearance were thick, filled with police reports, witness statements, and news clippings. Each page told a part of the story, some pieces fitting together, others jagged and incomplete. Emily had been last seen leaving a friend's house late one summer night. The official investigation had turned cold quickly, despite desperate searches and community vigils. Rumors had swirled, an argument with someone close, a mysterious stranger, a possible cover-up. But the truth remained elusive. As Sarah read, she imagined Emily's final hours, not just the facts, but the fear, the confusion, the moments when hope flickered and dimmed. She thought of the family left behind, trapped in limbo, clinging to memories that both comforted and tormented. The past was a heavy burden, but Sarah knew it was also the key. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back from the pages. A message from an unknown number. "I have information about Emily Saunders. We need to talk." Sarah's heart quickened. Could this be the break she had been waiting for? She stared at the screen, knowing that sometimes the dead do speak. It was only a matter of listening. The call came just as dusk settled over the city, casting long shadows that stretched across Sarah Blake's cluttered desk. She answered cautiously, the voice on the other end low and hesitant, an old man, frail but determined. "My name is Richard Wells," he began, voice trembling but urgent. "I don't have much time. I need to tell you the truth about Emily Saunders." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard promises before, letters from anonymous sources, whispered tips in dark bars, but something in Richard's tone was different. There was no hesitation, no demand for money or fame, just a need to unburden a secret kept for far too long. They agreed to meet the next day at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes and ears. When Sarah arrived, Richard was already there, sitting alone at a corner table. His eyes were clouded with age, but there was a sharpness beneath, a clarity that belied his weakened frame. Over coffee, Richard began to unravel his story, a story that had remained buried in silence for 2 decades. He spoke of Emily's last days, of encounters few knew about, and of a truth tangled in fear and betrayal. He confessed to knowing more than he had ever dared admit, bound by guilt and the shadows of his own past. As he spoke, Sarah took meticulous notes, sensing the gravity of every word. Richard revealed connections to powerful figures who had influenced the investigation from the start, people who wanted the case to remain closed. He spoke of threats he had faced, and the toll that silence had taken on his conscience. By the end of their meeting, Sarah knew this was no ordinary confession. It was a key, a fragile thread leading to answers long sought. But with it came danger. Those who had silenced the past would not welcome its return. As she left the cafe, the weight of the secret pressed heavily on Sarah's shoulders. The story was no longer just about Emily. It was about justice, truth, and the courage to confront a darkness that refused to fade. The morning light filtered weakly through the blinds as Sarah Blake sat alone in her apartment, the words from Richard Wells echoing in her mind. His confession had shattered the stillness that had long surrounded the case of Emily Saunders, sending ripples through the carefully constructed silence. Sarah pored over her notes, cross-referencing every detail Richard had shared with the official files and news reports. There were discrepancies, omissions in police records, testimonies that contradicted each other, and unexplained delays in the investigation. She called a former detective, someone who had worked on the case in its early days. His voice was guarded, cautious, but when Sarah mentioned Richard's name, a flicker of recognition crossed his tone. "Wells was involved," he said carefully. "But there were reasons no one wanted to dig too deep. Too many powerful people connected. It wasn't just a missing persons case. It was a mess." Sarah sensed the layers beneath the surface. The more she sifted through the ashes of old reports and faded memories, the more she realized how much had been buried alongside Emily. The city's archives yielded a surprising find, a sealed report that had been overlooked, detailing financial records and phone calls connected to people in positions of influence, names that were never publicly linked to the investigation. Each discovery brought new questions. Why had the investigation stalled? Who had pressured the authorities? And what price had been paid for silence? Sarah knew this was no ordinary story. It was a labyrinth of lies and power, with Emily Saunders caught somewhere in its center. As dusk fell, she prepared for the next step, reaching out to Emily's family, to those who had waited 20 years for answers that never came. Emily Saunders was more than a missing person. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. Sarah's visit to the Saunders family home revealed the human heart of the story, the quiet strength and enduring pain that no file could capture. Emily's mother, Helen, greeted Sarah with weary eyes that had seen too much. The house was filled with photographs, mementos, and echoes of a life interrupted. Helen spoke softly, recalling Emily's dreams and the last time she saw her. There was hope, and then heartbreak. Sarah listened carefully, understanding that beneath every statistic was a person, someone whose story deserved to be told fully. As she spent time with family, friends, and neighbors, a clearer picture of Emily's life emerged. A young woman with ambition and warmth, but also entangled in conflicts that hinted at deeper troubles. Sarah learned of a troubled relationship with a local businessman, whispered warnings, and subtle threats Emily had never shared publicly. Each layer peeled back revealed complexities that challenged the narrative she thought she knew. The investigation took Sarah into corridors of power, offices, council chambers, and private clubs where decisions were made and secrets protected. She uncovered connections between Emily's disappearance and influential figures who had the means and motive to manipulate the course of justice. Meetings with former colleagues and whistleblowers hinted at a conspiracy of silence, alliances forged to keep the past buried. Sarah felt the weight of resistance growing. Phone lines went dead, emails vanished, and anonymous warnings arrived. But the truth was pulling her deeper, unraveling a web where loyalty and fear coexisted. She realized that exposing the story meant challenging not just individuals but an entire system designed to protect itself. Pressure mounted as Sarah's investigation gained momentum. She faced increasing obstacles, legal threats, surveillance, and attempts to discredit her work. Her sources grew wary, some disappearing without a trace. The lines between friend and foe blurred. Sarah found herself navigating a dangerous landscape where every step forward invited backlash. Late nights were spent poring over documents, piecing together fragments before they vanished. Her own safety became uncertain, and yet the drive to uncover the truth burned brighter. With help from allies in the legal and journalistic communities, Sarah fortified her defenses. The story was no longer just about Emily Saunders. It was about holding power accountable. New evidence surfaced: a hidden diary belonging to Richard Wells, letters he had written but never sent, and recordings that painted a fuller picture. The confession took on new meaning as Sarah connected these pieces, revealing a narrative of betrayal and sacrifice. Richard's health deteriorated, his time running short, but his resolve remained unbroken. Sarah realized that the confession was not just a revelation, but a burden, one that had shaped lives and destinies. The case exploded into the public eye, sparking debates about justice delayed and the scars left by silence distanced themselves. She confronted the harsh reality of how truth can fracture relationships and unsettle comfortable lies. Despite this, she pressed on, determined to give Emily's story the justice it deserved. The opposition grew desperate, but so did the support from those demanding accountability. In a tense climax, Sarah uncovered the last piece, a witness who had remained silent for years. Their testimony shattered the remaining walls of denial and opened the door to closure. Emily's fate was finally revealed, a truth both devastating and necessary. Justice, though delayed, began to take shape. The aftermath was bittersweet. Families mourned and healed. The community grappled with the revelations, and Sarah reflected on the cost of truth. Legal proceedings began, powerful figures faced scrutiny, and a dialogue about systemic failures emerged. Emily's memory became a catalyst for change, a reminder that some echoes from the past demand to be heard. Sarah knew the journey was far from over, but the story had finally found its voice.